You have a chair around your neck. That's so cool.
Thank you. Yes, no, it seems like good luck. And that chair would be more sized for me than this one, which I'm very elegantly not reaching the floor.
You're tiny and adorable.
So, do you want to go first?
Oh, she's. I mean, thanks everybody for coming. It is my pleasure to be here with Megan Abbott because I have been such a fan of hers for like since the 30s.
We go way back.
No, like forever. And she is, to me, one of the rare writers who is able to pull off like a real literary fucking sentence, like poetry, and also have plot at the same time. And that is a rare thing that it just impresses the hell out of me. So thank you for letting me sit next to you.
Please. I will save my praise for you till you have finished your reading.
I'm going to read a page or two of this book, and this is about this character, Kick Lannigan, who was abducted as a child and then rescued 5 years later, and has now become, she's 21 and has become very, very capable in a wide array of skills, from shooting a gun to throwing stars and picking locks. Basically, she's taught herself to be safe in the world. And she's like if Elizabeth Smart took off the cardigan and the pearls and put on like a black leather cat suit,
and she
picked
wants
up
to.
Oh yeah, and picked up like a bunch of knives and just went out like at night and sought justice, which is what I fantasize about. She would be a lot like Kick Lannigan, but a little more Mormon.
Is that like a little pregnant?
Yeah, it is a little bit. All right. Kick Lannigan aimed the sights of her Glock, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The paper target shuddered. Kick inhaled the satisfying smell of gunpowder and concrete and squeezed the trigger again and again. She emptied the magazine. The gun barely moved in her hand. She had learned to shoot with a .22, but she'd been firing a .45 since she turned 14 and first started coming to the shooting range. Even at 14, she'd known she wanted something that could bring down a bigger target. She laid the gun on the counter, pressed the button to reel in the target, and watched it flutter toward her. Half the targets they sold at the range now were zombies. Everyone loved shooting zombies. But Kick preferred the old-fashioned black and white image of a square-jawed guy in a black watch cap. The target arrived, and she inspected her handiwork. Bullet holes collected at the heart, groin, and center of the forehead. A blush of pleasure burned her cheeks. For the last 7 years, she had only been allowed to fire range rental weapons. Now, finally, she was firing her own gun. Some people went out and got drunk when they came of age. Kick had picked out a Glock with a 10-round magazine and applied for a concealed weapons permit. The Glock 37 had all the performance of a .45 ACP, but with a shorter grip. It was a big gun, sized for small hands. The beveled slide and sleek black finish, the finger grooves and thumb rests. Kick loved every millimeter of that pistol. Her knuckles were raw, and the blue polish on her fingernails was chipped, but that Glock still looked beautiful in her hand. She glanced up from the gun and listened. The range was too quiet. The skin on Kick's arms prickled. She set the Glock back on the counter and tilted her head, straining to hear through her noise reduction headphones. The muffled crack of gunshots had been steady around her. There were only 3 people using the range that morning, and Kick had taken note of all of them. Her martial arts sensei called it being mindful. Kick called it being vigilant. Now she listened to the muted shots around her and tried to pinpoint what had changed. The woman a lane over from Kick had stopped firing. Kick had seen the woman's weapon when she crossed behind her, a pretty Beretta Stampede with a nickel finish and a revolving 6-bullet chamber. The Stampede was a replica of an Old West gunslinger's weapon, a big gun. Fire it at a car, and the bullet would pierce the body panel and crack the engine block. It was too much gun for that woman, which was why Kick had noted it. The woman had fired all 6 rounds, reloaded, and then fired just 3. Kit could feel her heartbeat instantly quicken. Her muscles tensed. Her calves itched. Fight or flight. That's how the shrinks explained it. For a few years after she'd first come home, the feeling would overcome her and she'd just take off, pell-mell, on foot. Once, her mother found her nearly 5 miles away in a Safeway parking lot. Her mother and sister had forced her into the car, screaming. Biofeedback, meditation, talk therapy, drug therapy, scream therapy, sensory deprivation tanks, yoga, Tai Chi, Chinese herbs, equine therapy. None of it had helped. It had been Frank who'd suggested letting her take Kung Fu when she was 11. The FBI had transferred him to Portland to help get her ready to testify, and he told her mother that martial arts would give Kit confidence, help her get through the trial. But he probably knew she just needed to hit something. There was no getting her back into the sensory deprivation tank after that. She started martial arts, boxing, target shooting, archery, and even knife throwing. Her parents thought she did it all to feel safe, and in a way they were right. She wanted to make sure that no one, not even her mother, would ever be able to force her into a car again.
Wow. I was lucky enough to read an early copy of this book, and I have to say, you know, and I've written abduction novels, and all of the crime writers have, and you think you've seen the beats and the rhythms of it, and then you read something like this, you know, and you realize game over, it's starting again, new game, because it finally we have an example of someone with a complex female heroine who doesn't always feel the things she's supposed to feel, doesn't have the emotions that necessarily have been mapped out and have been sort of trotted out in you know, Elizabeth Smart memoirs, or about how, you know, how she's supposed to move forward after an event like that. And all the rules are broken and new ones are created, and it just feels true and real and authentic and icky in the best way. You know, people are complicated, and it seems like you embrace that in the book, and that's what makes it so special. And then yet to have this sort of satisfying, high-octane thriller that can carry all that emotional weight was really powerful for me to read. And it feels like this exciting time we're in now for female writers writing crime and female characters in crime novels, and it feels like this is like a big new door kicked open, if you will, excuse the pun, in that area. So
it's hard to avoid, I've noticed.
I know. Okay, I've got all the fever ones, you know, with it, so I know. So it was really thrilling to get that early peek and to see all the rave reviews that have come since, the New York Times Book Review and Janet Maslin too. So it's a good time to be a dark lady.
Yeah. That is the takeaway. It is a good time to be a dark lady.
So I'm just going to read the first few pages of The Fever, and just to give briefly a little background. This is sort of a book I kind of wanted to write since I was a kid. I was a kid who really liked Gothic stories. I liked Shirley Jackson. I liked Nathaniel Hawthorne. I liked stories about small towns and you think they're this thing, but they're really this thing. And I was really obsessed as a kid with the Salem witch trials, obsessively so, and remain so. And I found out about them through a Shirley Jackson children's book that she wrote about the Salem witch trials. And I think of the idea of Shirley Jackson writing a children's book about anything, it's really creepy. But when you think about her writing about the Salem witch trials, but it's a straight book, and it was really haunting to me. And I think that now, when I sort of psychoanalyze myself at that age, I think that I was really interested in Salem and stories like that because they were stories with powerful women and girls who were being paid attention to. They were being listened to. They were exerting not a great power in Salem, of course, because they got a lot of people hanged, but they were, finally someone was listening to them. And that always really, I think, just felt so different from anything else as a kid in the late 70s, early 80s that I was finding anywhere else in the culture. Certainly YA was not what it was, not what it is now. So sort of that had been knocking around in my head for years. and it's really hard to write a book about Salem now. Some famous writers have already tackled the subject, and I'm not going to come after Arthur Miller, so I was never going to do that. But when I heard about this case that many of you have also probably heard about in upstate New York, of these girls in this small town that all developed these odd tics. It seemed to be spreading through the town, 18 girls. It really affected me. I was very influenced by seeing the girls on television and how frightened they look, and how frightened their parents were, but also this weird kind of power they had, because we could not look away. If you saw them on the Today Show, you never forget it. You'll remember it forever. So that had really stuck in my head, and literally the next day, and my agent is here, you can tell you, I started writing the book. It was as soon as I saw them on TV. And so the book is very different than the real life case, but it is about an outbreak in a small town, a bunch of teenage girls, and in this case it's centered around the Nash family. It's a father, divorced dad, and his 2 teenage kids, and this is his daughter's point of view in this scene, and she's 16 years old. She's kind of a bookish, shy girl, very devoted to her friends, and she's sitting in a classroom and something happens. At first, Lisa's desk chair just seemed to be rocking. Deanie's eyes were on it, watching the motion. The rocking of it made her feel a little sick. It reminded her of something. She wondered if Lise was nervous about the quiz. "Lise Daniels," Mrs. Chalmers called out, "you're bothering everyone else." It's happening, came a low snarl from Lisa's delicate pink mouth. Oh, her hands flying up, she grabbed her throat, her body jolting to one side. Then, in one swoop, as if one of the football players had taken his meaty forearm and hurled it, her desk overturned, clattering to the floor. And with it, Lise, her head twisting, slamming into the tiles, her bright red face turned up, mouth teeming with froth. "Lise," sighed Mrs. Chalmers, too far in front to see. "What is your problem?" After, Deanie couldn't get the look of Lisa's face out of her head. Her eyes had shot open seconds after she fell. "Why am I here?" she'd whispered, blinking ferociously, back arched on the floor, her legs turned in funny ways, her skirt flown up to her waist, Mrs. Chalmers shouting in the hallway for help. "Why am I on the floor?" It had taken 2 boys and Mr. Banasiak from across the hall to get Lise to her feet. Deanie watched them steer her down the hall, her head resting on Billy Gagan's linebacker's shoulder, her long hair thick with floor dust. "Deanie, no," Mrs. Chalmers said, taking her firmly by the shoulders. "You stay here." But Deanie didn't want to stay, didn't want to join the thrusting clutches of girls whispering behind their lockers, the boys watching Lise turn the corner, her skirt hitched high in the back, her legs bare despite the cold weather, the neon flare of her underpants. At first, they wouldn't let her into the nurse's office. "Deanie, her mother isn't even here yet," snipped Mrs. Harris, the head of something called Facilities Operations. "My dad asked me to check on her," Deanie lied, her friend Gabby nodding next to her. The ruse worked, though not for Gabby. Lacking my father's teacher privileges, she was dispatched immediately to second period. "Find out everything," Gabby whispered as Mrs. Harris waved her out. The nurse's office door was ajar, and Deanie could hear Lise calling her name. Everyone could hear, teachers stopping at their mailboxes. "Deanie!" Lise cried out. "What did I do? Did I do something? Who saw?" Peering in the open door, Deanie saw Lise keeling over on the exam table, her lips ribboned with drying froth, one sneaker hanging from her foot. She wasn't wearing any tights, her legs goose-quilled and whiter than the paper sheet beneath her. She bit me," said Nurse Tammy, holding her own forearm, which looked wet. She hadn't been working there long, and rumor was a senior athlete with a sore knee had scored 2 Tylenol with codeines from her on her very first day. "Here, Deanie!" Head whipping around, Lise gripped the table edge beneath her thighs, and Nurse Tammy rushed forward, trying to help. "Deanie, what happened to me? Is everyone talking about it? Did they see what I did?" Outside the nurse's office, Mrs. Harris was arguing loudly with someone about something, the assistant principal's stern jock voice chiming in. "No one saw," Deanie said. Are you okay?" But Lise couldn't seem to focus, her hand doing some kind of strange wobbling thing in front of her like she was conducting an invisible concert. She stuttered, her eyes panicked. "Are they laughing at me?" Deanie wanted to say something reassuring. Lisa's mother, vaguely hysterical under the best of circumstances, would be here any second, and Deanie wanted to help while she could. "No way, Lizzie," she tried, smiling. "Everyone saw your Hello Kitty undies, though. Watch the boys come now." As Deanie walked out, a coolness began to sink into her, the feeling that something was wrong, but the wrongness was large and without reference. She'd seen Lise with a hangover, with mono. She'd seen girlfriends throw up behind the loading dock after football games and faint in gym class, their bodies loaded with diet pills and cigarettes. She'd seen Gabby black out in the girls' room after she gave blood. But those times never felt like this. Lying on the floor, her mouth open, tongue lolling, Lise hadn't seemed like a girl at all. It must have been a trick of the light. Looking down at Lise, her lips stretched wide, Deanie had thought for 1 second that she saw something hanging inside her friend's mouth. Something black, like a bat, flapping. So that's the beginning. And everything's fine after that. The end.
And then they got better. I was really interested in what you were saying about female power because I write this other series that is about this detective. It's basically this sort of twisted love story between a detective and this very beautiful, charismatic serial killer, Gretchen Lowell. And since those books came out, Gretchen Lowell doesn't have a point of view in those books. We never get inside her head. She is an antagonist. She kind of comes and goes. But to most people, they're the Gretchen Lowell books. And there are always a couple of young women who find me after an event and say something to the equivalent of, and in fact, quite literally, "I find Gretchen Lowell so inspiring."
I love that.
And the first couple times it happened, I was like, whoa, thank you for reading, security. And I really wow, she's a serial killer, right? She kills lots of people for fun. She's really good at it. And I kept kind of thinking about that. What is it that is inspiring about Gretchen Lowell? And and I finally realized that it's that she has the power in the room. She is capable. And she never tries to explain herself. She doesn't apologize, and she never experiences self-doubt. And I think, culturally, it seems like in the last, Ally McBeal, maybe on, culturally, the most common female archetype, in film certainly, and in television, and in a lot of books, is this woman who's, no matter how capable professionally, is just kind of paralyzed by self-doubt and questions everything, which clearly resonates with a female audience, and there are lots of reasons why. But I think that when we have an archetype that deviates from that, that it is really powerful for readers, especially young female readers. Even if they're serial killers. But it was one of the reasons I wanted to write about Kick Lannigan. I wanted to write a capable character who wasn't a murderer. We'll see how it goes. It's crazy, I know.
But I think that's exactly right. I think there's an archetype that we're drawn to. In some ways, it's supposed to be a fantasy, but it's sort of like women aren't getting that, from the nervous, emotionally confused post-Ally McBeal version of the woman. She's capable professionally, but she's a mess personally. And that's not, the reason we have archetypes is that they do things we can't do. Well, I can do that. Right? I excel at that. But I want to see an archetype that gets to do the things I don't always get to do, which is what I think we get with Kick, because I can't do those things physically, but also, though I'd like to try the knife throwing, but but also she has this deep well of rage, and I thought about this a lot when I was reading your book, because I thought about it a lot with mine too, is that we're so uncomfortable with seeing female anger in any way that's not a joke in the culture. It makes us so uncomfortable that we have to turn it into a joke. But I think that's something that female readers and male readers too need to see and read, and it seems like there's just such a hesitancy there. There's such a fear of what it'd be like to go there, and that's why I think that it feels so exciting reading yours.
I have another question. I'm sorry to make this into like a Q&A, but now that I have you here, there are a couple things I want to get off my chest. One of the things, for Susie Vitello, who's in the front row, who's actually is from Portland, and we are in a writing group. We meet once a week with several other novelists and share our work. And she writes young adult novels and has a book called The Empress Chronicles that's just out this week, right? Young adult, little plug. But we talk a lot about, because she is the only one in our group who is writing young adult, about what is young adult like, and it all comes down to the point of view, really, and like it's this interesting discussion, and other people will bring in work and kind of in our group, like they'll have a character, like a teenage character, and they won't quite know where it's going to land, like is it young adult or not, and so this is a conversation we have over and over again. And I think it's interesting that your work, and I know you have this conversation a lot, but you have these young characters, and it's so real and so immediate in terms of point of view, and yet it's not young adult. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the line has become blurrier and blurrier in recent years, and it is sort of impossible to tell. I had this weird conversation a couple months ago with this guy who was interviewing me, and he said, and he was saying in a jokey way, but he said I feel a little bit like a pervert reading your book because I'm reading about teenage girls. And I thought, well, and this is like a middle-aged white guy. You know how many books about middle-aged white guys I've read, and you're supposed to think it's just, it's like he was saying, I'm only doing it because it's you're writing about it. But it's so strange that we would still somehow think that if it's about teenage girls, it has to be shuttled into this little category and kept there, and no one else would want to read about teenage girls other than teenage girls. And,
right.
And it's really what this conversation says about us, that we have to keep. Obviously, the book business is a business of categories, but really most books don't fit into a category in that way. So I think it's always a question that gets thrown back to us, and whenever I think about it, I think about the sort of dearth of good YA when I was a kid, and why at age 9 or 10, and probably the same for you, I was reading books for adults because there was just nothing.
Right.
And I think that
all we had was Pet Sematary.
You're right. That quaint tale of female development. So it's great that there's more of it now, and that's pushing the conversation into it. But it's sort of impossible to answer without revealing your own prejudices about what those genres mean, which I guess is true with all genre discussions.
So why is it that so many women read young adult books?
Yeah.
There's so many of my friends, who are in their 30s and 40s read 80% of their diet. That's what they're drawn to. Is stories about teenage girls. Is it because they aren't they haven't found? I'm just really interested in that.
Yeah, is it because that there's still not enough female coming of age stories in general in the culture? Mm-hmm. There's so many male. Even when we think of the coming of age novel, we think of a male coming of age. That I think a lot of us grew up without ever having that. And now all of a sudden there's these great stories about being a teenage girl
that are, frankly, like they feature more proactive and capable protagonists.
Right.
Like you look at Katniss and these characters, or Hermione, or these female characters who are way more capable than most of the the 30-year-olds that we see in culture.
And they also have like dirty, bad, ugly feelings that that girls aren't supposed to have, and yet all do. And so I think that's really exciting too, and to sort of see that play out. It's sort of I guess we never really leave behind our screwed up teenage moments, and
I totally have.
Long gone. But it makes me think, to go back, and this will be without any spoilers, but I don't think this is a spoiler at all. But there's a very fascinating to me relationship in your novel between Kik and her abductor, and it's so delicately rendered, and I've just never seen a complex or a fully rounded portrayal of that, or even really treated as a relationship in any books that I've read about an abduction. I wonder how you decide to handle that without revealing anything.
So Kik was abducted by someone who is now in prison, and his name is Mel, and they have a very complex relationship where he is clearly a really bad guy who stole her childhood, and yet he also is a father figure. She lived with him for 5 years when she was a kid, from age 6 to 11. And I was very interested in that relationship. I mean, that seemed to me, the complexity of that, and trying to imagine what that would be like. Just even reading stories about Elizabeth Smart or J.C. Dugard, or et cetera, which we're all just as narrative value alone, just remarkable stories. And I just wanted to understand what that would be like. But it's interesting, it seems to be a theme in all of my books in some way, this kind of like captor-captee relationship, and I have no idea why. I really, there must be a reason, right?
Tell me,
but
Jill.
I really
lean back
over in the leather chairs. There's, I wish, probably when I figure that out, I can stop writing.
Then you don't want. But isn't it true that things? But the things that we're surprised that keep reemerging,
the themes,
and trying to and working different angles at it and approaching it in different ways, and and not really. So much of writing comes from the unconscious, I suppose, and so that's, That seems good, right?
It is. No, we call our writing group our therapy group, because that really is what it ends up being, with a little bit more crying.
Do you read each other's work in progress then? So had they read some of this?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh yes, definitely. We read each other's work, and we bring it in and we read it out loud. So I would bring in a chapter, pass it out, and then I would read the chapter out loud. Everybody would follow along and make notes as I'm reading, and then we would all talk about it. And I would maybe take some notes on my master copy, and then I would collect all of the pieces. Wow. So it's a way of also then not letting the work kind of live in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Because it is so raw.
Right.
And reading work aloud is really a very useful exercise, because you can sometimes hear places where it feels like there's you feel the bumps that you might gloss over if you're reading it in your head. And it uses it uses different muscles to be able to edit like that. But if you get a good group together who can develop those muscles, it's incredibly valuable. It's really useful. And this book had a point of view, a bishop who, like Kik, meets a dark, mysterious stranger, like people do, who wants to involve her in this investigation of missing kids. And the two of them, their relationship is going to kind of be the core of the series moving forward. And he had a point of view in the first draft. There were chapters that were from Bishop's point of view.
Wow.
And my writing group, finally convinced me not to do it. And it took some haranguing on their part. They're very bossy. And they were totally right. They were totally right.
But you probably needed to write his point of view to get something about him, and then you could let it go. I often think that's the case. You're looking at Kik from another person's point of view, which is useful to and sort of moving things around. But then it's the kill your darlings to coin a phrase.
That's catchy.
You can use that if you want.
I'll quote you. I too had a hard time. I would write scenes that were like these big scenes, like that scene between Kik and Mel, her abductor, in the prison, and I wrote it from Bishop's point of view. Because I couldn't get in, because it was so complicated. Like, what is going on in Kik's? Like, it was easier to write it outside of her, rather than having to write from her point of view inside all of that complexity, because she is so conflicted. So there were several chapters like that it was my way into the scene.
Yeah.
Do you write small or big? Do you write big and then winnow down, or do you write small and
I write. I guess I cut a lot. Pacing obsesses me, so I guess I do write big in that way. But I've never written anything with a word count longer than 85,000 words, just to make Allison laugh, because she's got these huge drafts. and I think it's the pulp novelist in me at heart. But then I do a lot of cutting, and
85,000 is the perfect word count.
Yeah, and I have one of my books is 45,000 words. You wouldn't know it because they space the print out, but yeah. Because often this book is the most characters I've ever had. Most of my books have 3 characters in a motel room. I keep my worlds very small. I'm working on it. That's what I'm working out. But I do totally believe in cutting and doing that and going through these processes. And the hardest thing in some ways I think about being a writer is writing a novel is like going down a tunnel to which there may be no end. You never know what you're going to end up using or what's going to be there, what's going to matter. So much of it's like monumental waste of time, but you have to kind of trust in it. Did you have any moments, because you were also switching series, moments of doubt? Is this the right tunnel to drop down?
I always have a point where I feel like I am such a fucking fraud. Like, I can't believe I could convince these people to give me money, and they think I can write a book. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, no one can write a book. Like, I certainly can't. Like, they expect the whole stack of pages. Like, oh my God. Like, someone has to tell them. I should call them and tell them that I can't do this.
I would just laugh in my bed of money and say,
really, like, it is this point of just being like, oh my God. Like, I can't, I'm insane. Only an insane person would think they could write a book.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I think that other people would want to read it.
It's just like there's it breaks down completely if you think about it at all.
Yeah.
Which is why I think that self-delusion is like key, like to being a writer. Like you have to convince yourself that writing a book is perfectly normal. Many people write books that are quite excellent.
Sure, these people talk to me in my head.
They read it. Other people read it, and they say, what a good book. Thank you for writing that. Like, I have to just tell myself that story, and believe it, because otherwise I would just be curled up on the floor, just sobbing softly.
Right, yeah.
How long does it take to write?
My first draft is usually 8 or 9 months, and then about 5 or 6 months of revision, usually. How about you?
Yeah, I have a book due a year, so, like, a year. They're really hard to write the night before, too, let me tell you. You want us to take questions, don't you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we're starting questions, I can bring a mic to people. All right, up in the front.
Thank you both, first of all. Megan, I remember when you were reading The End of Everything a couple years back, and someone asked you in the audience what was next, and you started talking about the fever, and I imagine your take on that epidemic. So I'm going to borrow that question and say, what's next, so I can imagine how you're going to take on that subject.
Right, yes. Let's see, the next one is, it's about the family with a child prodigy.
You're so good at coming up with ideas. Seriously, I would read that. That's enough right there. You like Megan Abbott, a family about it with a child prodigy.
It was like one thing I saw on TV again. If I didn't watch TV, I'd never write a book. But I saw it was with the last Olympics. one of the Olympic gymnasts, Allie Reisman, if any of you watch the Olympics, there was this viral footage of her parents in the stands watching her perform, and they were so into it, and they were so torn. They were moving this way and that way, and and they were counting out beats and steps to her floor routine, and they looked insane. And so this is so it became fascinating, the idea of parents of prodigies, especially once they've invested in the idea of the prodigy. So this is a novel about that from the point of view of the mother, and something really bad happens, because that's how only way I know how to write a book.
It sounds good.
The next in the series, are you already done with it? Or getting done?
Yeah. Uh-huh. I'm at about that point where I'm like, they're going to find out I can't write a book. But the next Kick book is the next book.
More questions from the audience?
Oh, do I have anything to say about my covers? The approval, like they will send the cover and say, what do you think? And I say, I can't believe you made a cover for my book. You're so awesome. I really do, no matter what it's always just so exciting. It is one of the best parts, even though it's happened many times now, like when you see it cover, that someone has made for your book. That's so cool that they do that. I really love it. And it always just looks so great to me. I'm always just like, I love that cover. Thank you. How about you?
Yeah, no, it's always crazy, and I love the cover so much for The Fever. I've always loved my covers.
Great covers.
It's
really spectacularly great covers.
I think so. Go Little Brown.
Really?
The only challenge that we've had, and we had this with the last two books too, is this why we don't want a book that looks like it's just YA or is YA book, because then adults won't read it, or that men won't read a book if girls are on the cover. None of these things are necessarily true, but it's stuff you have to think about, because people do buy books based on the cover, as do I will admit. So that's always been the challenge with my last few books, is cueing to all kinds of readers that this book is for them. Everybody will love this book is the goal always. So.
Yeah, my first book was first thriller was called Heartsick, and that they literally did 100 different cover designs for that, because every design either looked like a book about a divorce or female depression.
Oh God!
For some reason, they just couldn't get it, and finally they just went with red, bumpy red with a heart. And then there was anecdotally, it was very difficult to sell that to a red book with a heart on it to men, in airports.
Yeah.
Men didn't want to walk around. Well, with ebooks, it's not a big deal, but this was just sort of at the front end of that, and walking around with a red book with a heart on it, and heart in the name, until they heard that no, it's gory, and then it was fine. Then they felt okay about it, but that seemed to be anecdotally an issue. So now they have to think about what a book looks like as a thumbnail. That is a really drives the discussion, because most people see books as thumbnails, on websites. It's very interesting. So it has to work as both.
So you were speaking about teenagers, and Megan, when I read your last two books, I was really struck by how truthful the experience of being a teenager was. A lot of memories came back. And there is sort of that weird, sinister underside of it when I'm not even sure, when you're going through it, you really understand. So just curious, do you know a lot of teenagers, or do you just really remember those years clearly?
So the question is, does Megan hang out with teenagers?
I roll with the teens on the weekends. No, I don't know that many teenagers, and the ones I do know don't share much with me. But I do feel keenly attached personally to that age. I feel like that's the age that I felt the most feelings or something, which is true for a lot of us. And I've talked with people about this before, and I think there is something for a lot of us about high school as being the most horrific experience of one's life, good and bad. It's amazing anyone gets out of it alive. It is really like Thunderdome, and it's like prepares you, with your life skills forever. And so somehow it tunneling back to that. But that's not to say that there are teenagers. It's always the same and it's always different. So the part that I've had to extrapolate is social media and texting and all these things that I didn't have as a teenager. But then I imagine what it would be like if I did have it, and how unbelievably terrible it would be to be a teenage girl in the age of social media, and how weirdly empowering it could be too. So it is really. It is really mostly imagination. For the last book, Dare Me, with cheerleaders, I did do a lot of online research into chat rooms, and which is why I'm on some FBI list or NSA list, I'm sure, as this IP address is always looking at cheerleader websites. But that was more about the skill and the technique. But thank you.
And if you haven't read Dare Me, Dare Me is. It is, and I'm being completely truthful. Dare Me is one of my favorite books of all time.
Oh, thank you.
If you have not read that, anybody here, do not leave this building without it. Buy it. Don't just take it.
It's some angry girls in that one.
It's really remarkable.
Thank you.
More questions?
First of all, it's such a pleasure to get to come and eavesdrop on this conversation, because I love both of your work, and this is just like a conversation we have in my office every week. Why can't we find more books like this, And I was actually wondering, because the way the conversation usually goes, what books would you recommend as books that you would say have those dark ladies, or kind of inspire you in the same way that I think your books kind of speak to the people here? What are some comp titles that you would recommend for us that we might not have read? I can think of some myself, but I'd love to know what you love.
You first.
Living Dead Girl by Elizabeth Scott.
Okay.
YA abduction story written before J.C. Lee Dugard, completely unflinching.
Wow.
And when that story came out on the news, I was like, Elizabeth wrote this book. What happened? And it might as well not be YA. It's both YA and not. I think it was very hard to categorize. And to some extent, maybe its performance in the marketplace reflected that. But I just thought it was a really important book. And of course, this is the year of Gillian Flynn. So for me, it's Tana French. I could go on, but this is your panel, so you have to answer.
Well, I will certainly say that everybody should be reading Alison Galen, who's in the audience, who is one of the best crime novelists going right now, and her recent series is just not to be missed. So the Brenna Spector series, everybody should get it. And I totally agree with the books you recommended, and I just feel like there's just this flood of them now. This flood. Wow, that was really frightening. Now I feel like I need to say something really important. I read a great YA book earlier this summer that I recommend a lot of people, which you probably know of, which is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, which really staggered me. And that's another book where it's called YA. I don't really know why it's called YA, other than that there are teenagers in it, and it's another really dark, complicated, weird female main character. It's really exciting that that's all on the table now, and it feels like a good moment. And I think that Gone Girl really opened a lot of doors that everybody had been pounding on. Any recommendations in your camp? It's always hard when you to name one.
Well, yeah, it is. Like, I always cite Val McDermott as an inspiration.
yeah.
The Carol Jordan, Tony Hill books, which, not really about abduction or really, like, Carol is a very powerful character. But I really do read those books to see when they're going to kiss, which is like, that just totally, I subverts everything I've just said. But I'll be honest, I really I just want them to be happy. That's all I want. And for them to catch the serial killers that keep menacing their town. What? I know, she kind of, they are in their own way. That's part of the tension. But right now, honestly, I have a 9-year-old, and our whole pop culture world is Doctor Who. Like, we are thick, like deep into Doctor Who, and I found it really interesting having watching several episodes a day, right, with her. We've gone through many doctors, and I grew up watching the Tom Baker Doctor Who's, like, he was my doctor, with Sarah Jane, and it's interesting to me, like, the women on Doctor Who are always the companion. They fulfill the companion role, which kind of by definition is there's unequal in terms of the whose power in the relationship, and he always ends up leaving them, or they get sucked into a different dimension or whatever, right? But I've loved seeing how that role has evolved, and how he does have these really cool kick-ass companions. So really, it's all about Doctor Who. I could probably answer any question anyone asks through that lens.
We're running a little low on time for this evening, so I think that's about all that we've got left. But thanks so much to Megan and Chelsea for coming out.